Benford, 1 Peter chapter 3. This is where we is. Let's go ahead and start. In the same way, you wives be submissive to your husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Let not your adornment be external only, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry and putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the same imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. Now, since my generation, do we know anybody like that? I don't know. For in this same way in former times, the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their husbands. Thus Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. Now you husbands likewise live with your wives in an understanding way, as they are a weaker vessel, since she is a woman. And grant her honor as a fellow heir of grace of life, so that in your prayers may not be hindered. To sum up, let everyone be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, never returning an evil for an evil or an insult for an insult, but granting instead a blessing. For if you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. For it is written, let him who means to love life and see good days refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking guile. And let him turn away from all evil and do only good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears attend always to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who would do evil. And who is there, and who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for that which is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are still blessed. And do not fear intimidation, and do not be troubled, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for that hope and gladness within, yet with gentleness and reverence. And keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ, they will be put to shame. For it is better if God should will it so that you should suffer for doing what is right rather than doing what is wrong. For Christ himself also died for sins once and for all, and just as the unjust, in order that he might bring us to God, having put to death in the flesh, but were made alive in the Spirit. In which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient, but the patience of God, waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark. In a few, that is, 8 persons were only brought forth safely through the water. Corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, and not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is at the right hand of God, having gone to heaven after angels and authorities and powers had been subjected over to him. What do you think about that? I forget. Who was our board cleaner? They fell down. They fell down on their job. This is not going to look good on their permanent record. Oh my gosh. Don't use the purple pen, Chanter. Or the green, it's hard to get off. Okay.
You're getting exercise.
Well, I can't do it with my right hand because my shoulder's so bad. Say what?
Your heart is on the left and you're working on it.
Oh, yeah. That's it, huh? All right. What do you think about this chapter? You know, Paul had a very big problem, and his big problem was trying to make Christianity compatible to a very unchristian world. And if you know anything about life in general, mankind is very much like water. It will always seek its lowest point if given the chance. Man will sink lower and lower and lower and lower until pretty much you get to the point where anything goes. You know, just if it feels good, do it. Go for the gusto. You're worth it. Grab all the goods because, you know, that's what you do. And the world's been teaching us that for a very long time. So now Paul comes along with a religion of sacrifice and a deliberate intent, if you will, to walk the other way. To try and do good for people even though they'll do nothing for you. To do good for people even when they don't appreciate it. To do good for people even when they don't acknowledge it. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the sermon today, so I don't want to get ahead of myself. But you got to ask yourself, how can I package or market a religion that speaks of sacrifice and the giving up of one's own self and resources to the betterment of another in a world that tells you that you should be number one and go get everything you want? How would you do that? Well, Paul was very clever in that he appeals to a place perhaps where everybody can understand. What is that? Well, it's the marriage relationship. You know, chances are pretty good we are all married or have been married for some time. We've all been mothers, we've all been fathers, we've all been, you know, had the responsibility of raising children. Some have done it very well, others, you know, the standard quote. It's the old bell curve routine. You know, most fathers are right in this area here. You know, they're not angels, but they're not in prison either. Whereas then there's a little bit down here who are not fathers at all. And there's those up here that are just intolerable because they're like helicopter parents. Hovering over your head, you can't do, think, or say anything without being immediately corrected or redirected. And that's who we are. But most of them are okay. So if you shoot, as old Harley used to say, shoot at one, you'll probably hit a bunch when you're duck hunting. You got a flock flying over. Shoot at one, you'll probably hit 5 or 6. You never know. And that's what he's doing. He's going right here. He's shooting at most of the people who are responsible husbands, who are responsible wives, who are responsible homemakers and home providers and home sustainers, thinking that if I can hit a few of these in here with the importance of Jesus in your life and how to make this a better experience always, then maybe it'll take, you know, maybe some seeds will get planted in some good soil, and before you know it, Christianity will start to blossom. And that's exactly what he's doing here. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, wives, be submissive, shut up, don't do nothing. That's not what he's saying. He's saying in that general culture of the first century, let's face it, women had no voice. Women had no right to own property. Women had no vote of any kind. Women had actually didn't even have the right to own property outside of being married to a man, which was mostly the incentive for women to get married. Even if their father died and left them a house, literally the law could come and say, well, do you have a husband? No, I don't. Do you have a son? No, I don't. Well, then you don't have a house either, because we're taking this from you and we're going to sell it and use it for ourselves. This is how a lot of the Pharisees got extremely rich. They did this to their own people, which is what Jesus complains about in the Gospels when he says, you hypocrites, you have all these resources. You could have helped so many. And what all you do is devour widows' houses and leave the children as orphans in the street. Do you think you honor God in doing this? You know, this is a common situation of life. I get that. But there are ways to make that a little bit better. Let me give you an example. Well, I don't know if I'm very good at this. That is a cupcake. Now, it is just a plain cupcake. Nothing on it, nothing in it. Just plain old, vanilla cake or chocolate cake, whatever you want. It's just a cupcake. Is that good? Well, it's if it's a good cake, it's a good cake, right? Now, if I put all kinds of icing on it, what do you think?
Better.
Is it a better cake?
Better.
Sure it is. How about lots of sprinkles? I know. And the more you dress that sucker up, the better people go, ooh, I like that. Well, that's exactly what Paul is doing to the everyday, mundane, never-ending commitment of husbands and wives, i.e. families. He's saying, you can make this like this with simple things. First of all, wives, do what your husband asks you to do. Don't put up in a fight. Don't put up an argument. Don't make him justify every little thing in the world. Just do it. And husbands, treat your wives as God loves the church. Well, how did God love the church or his people? Simple. He died for them. Kind of the ultimate sacrifice, wouldn't you think? And Paul's calling us to love our wives as much as Christ loved his church. In other words, if you got to die for her all the way. Treat her with respect, treat her with kindness, treat her with soft words, not loud words. And before you know it, your plain old hunk of cake here called a family your wife might start looking a little more great to you. And you might start looking a little more sprinkly to her. See what I'm saying? So Paul is going into a very common situation, husbands and wives, and saying, for the most part, men yell, women either respond or they don't. Either way, there's going to be an argument and discussing about it every time. Why do you do that? People look at you and say, wow, they fight all the time, they scream all the time. We all know people like that. Why in the world would I want to get married? Why in the world would I want to get into this? Well, the same thing is true of Christianity. Right now the church is seen in the eyes of the pagan as hypocrites, right? Oh, you're all just a bunch of hypocrites. But if you press them to define that, they're not so keen to be able to tell you. Well, you all lie just like we do. That's true. But we're aware of that, and we're trying not to, and we're asking forgiveness from God when we do. We're trying to make a conscious, intended, purposed effort to better ourselves. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. How about if you had a pastor that never lied? Or never bent the truth or exaggerated? You'd have a lot of boring stories in the sermon, wouldn't you? Trust me, that fish was this big. Jesus did that, Camel through the eye of a needle. Come on. Taking a plank out of your brother's eye, or the lumber out of your brother's eye, so you can get the speck out of Barb's eye. Jesus knew how to make a point. And fortunately, you have a pastor that knows how to put icing on the cupcake as well. And that's what Paul's doing. Jesus did it, Paul's doing it, and he's doing it most effectively. And he said, you will not bring honor or glory to God if this turmoil is going on in your church, in your homes. If you can't get along with the woman that you're supposed to love the most, how are you ever going to get along with anybody else? If you're stealing and lying and cheating and being ugly over here, people look at you in the Christian sense. Are they going to see Christ and the glory of God? No, they're just going to see another, you guys are all hypocrites. Well, today that's become the common cliche, which has, in my opinion, no meaning whatsoever. That's why I say if you press them on it, they'll say, well, I don't know. You know, well, then stop saying it. Stop saying it. It's like I say, well, Barbara's always late. Is Barbara always late? No. I just assumed that, you see. So I projected onto her, and then I can say, all of you guys are always late, and that's why I don't go to church. 11 o'clock service never starts at 11 o'clock. Well, we're close. But the point is, that's not so. And the only way to prove that, or to evidence it, is to what? Evidence in our life. And that's the toughest thing to do. You know why? Because all of our lives we've been taught to go for the gusto, make straight A's, be the best student out there, play hard on that baseball team, be the best player, you know, go for the MVP. You're worth it, you're better than everybody else. Remember that. Am I really better than everybody else, Dad? Well, I've got 3 big brothers that told me that wasn't true. They pounded me all the time. Shut up, Tom. Oh, you want to know something about that wedding I was telling you about last night? Very cool is they had wood, and it was carved very tinily and thinly. I don't know if tinily is a word, but very thinly wood carved in your name, where you sat at the table. Carol and I took ours. We brought them home. But the outrage of that was not Carol or, you know, whatever. They put Tommy in front of mine.
This was John Haley's son, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why they...
I bet Haley and Donna did it. And they said, well, I know he hates to be called Tommy. Nobody calls me Tommy but my mommy. That's it. The only reason I let her do it is because she brought me into this world. And she'll take me out. But I have a wooden thing that says Tommy. I'm not supposed to stop the other M and the Y. I just have Tom. So I thought that was kind of unique. I don't know where I was going with that. It's just... I don't know why it came up in my brain. It just did all of a sudden. I was going somewhere with it. Anyway, this is what Paul's talking about. Now, he's talking about this because, A, it can really enhance your marriage, believe it or not. It can enhance your relationship at home, and eventually it can enhance your relationship with everybody. Let's say you didn't just treat your husband right, or your brother-in-law right, but eventually your mom, your parents, and your kids, and then what outside the walls of your immediate family, the Roches next door, and you know the guys down the street, and the pastor at the church, and you start treating everybody like this. You see them like that, but the thing is, they see you eventually like this, right? It's a no-lose situation. But you know what it costs? This is the most expensive cupcake in the world. It's going to cost full 100% sacrifice and dedication and commitment on your part. You can't just be a nice guy every once in a while. You got to be a nice guy all the time until the people around you say, that Chanter or that Racha or that whoever, they are just so kind ever since. And we know people like that. In fact, many times we bury him and we say, oh, I never heard a mean word come out of her mouth. Or I've never heard him seen him do a bad thing at all. They're just reliable, wonderful people. I came over here to the church yesterday to get my holy robes and all that stuff to go do the wedding. And, you know, Robert has rebuilt our kitchen. Well, now he's taken it upon himself to rebuild half our building.
I saw the post out there. I thought Robert's been back.
Those rotten posts, he took them all out, that sagging beam and all that. They got these huge hydraulic jacks and cranked it back up. redid all the work. Him and two other guys. I don't know who the two other guys were. Redid it all day, morning till late in the afternoon when I was leaving for the wedding. And they worked and worked. And if you look it out there, he says, and he was apologizing to me. He says, sorry, we don't have time to paint it. I said, well, somebody can paint it. Not everybody can rebuild it, but anybody can wave a brush up and down. That's not, a lot of talent there. How many of us knew Robert, say, 6 months ago?
Not really.
Not really. He's been here a while. And I've had him out the house a few times, and I've gotten to know him and Margot. In fact, I met Margot for the first time when she was in a hospital. And I heard they'd come to church like one time. Next thing I knew, she was in the hospital. And I went down there. I'd never spoken to this woman before. I opened the hospital door, and I said, Margot? She says, yes. And I said, are you dead yet? She looked at me and said, who asked that kind of question in a hospital? Pastor Tom does. Oh, Lord. That's who I'm bringing. She still remembers that to this day. I asked her. When Tom first met you, what did he say in the hospital? She'll say, Margot, huh? Who's that? Are you dead yet? I've gotten to know them over the last couple of years or so. And I think we got a couple of nice looking cupcakes sitting out there. And I know that by the fact that they are a whole lot of what I am not. And I envy their cupcake a little bit. And I say, I got to be a nicer guy. I got to be a sweeter guy. I got to be a kinder guy. And I try, and then I get in my truck and try and go somewhere, and then all that falls apart. I am not a good cupcake in my truck. Out of my truck, I'm fine, but drivers, have you seen what's out there on the roads? Anyway, this is what Paul's talking about. Now, he's doing that not just to enhance this, but he's saying you are inadvertently giving glory to God in everything you do. In fact, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the sermon. You guys don't have to sit through the sermon now. If you want to be great in the eyes of God, there's only one way to do it. And you know what? It's not just knowing and believing. It's doing. Christianity is a verb, people. It's not an adjective. Like, I'm a Christian. Like that's something wonderful. No, people should say, by what they've observed, she's a Christian. How do you know that? Look at her life. Look at her day-to-day behavior. Look at what she values as most important, as over and against what the rest of the world values as most important. There's only one way to prove that you're a Christian and that you're a great man or woman of God, and that is to prove it, to do it. You can know everything about the scriptures, and I know guys that can quote chapter and verse of that Bible, and I've studied it for 45 years. I can't do that. To be quite frank with you, I don't want to do that. That to me is just so tedious. Chapter 15, verse 9 says, so what? I got it right here in front of me. I'll look it up. Just a minute. Oh, that's what it says. By the way, no, don't go there, Chanter. Don't go there. Thank you. God just prevented me from telling you a really stupid story that I can't tell you. Anyway, this is it. So this is chapter 3 of Peter. Now, put all of that as over and against the man that we know as Peter. What was he in the Bible? What was he in the Gospels? Well, he was little or no help at all. And though he was destined to be the rock, the head upon the foundation upon which the church is built, fact of the matter is he wasn't. James was, much more than Peter. I'm not saying Peter didn't do a great job. He went out and started a couple churches. Mostly went back and played with Paul's churches after Paul was dead. We know that he wasn't much of a good-looking cupcake. You know, he acted quick. He leaped before he looked, as we say. He spoke before he thought it through. And usually was an embarrassment to God and the rest of the kingdom and to the Christian movement in general. Partly these guys hid away because they were afraid what they did to Christ they were going to do to them. Why would the people perceive it that way? Well, they didn't see the goodness of Christ, evidently. They all waved palm branches, 2 Sundays ago. And then 4 days later, they crucified him. That doesn't sound like much of a dedication to me. I was real sweet with my wife at church, and then we went home and I beat her up. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't. But that's what human nature is for the most part. We're going to get what we want, when we want it, how we want it. In other words, I want all the glory, all the praise, all the everything brought to me. That's not the selfless life of a servant. The selfless life of a servant not only enhances and brings beauty to the relationship, it also glorifies God in the way Christ did himself. He even asked Pilate, he goes, for what good act that I've done are you punishing me for? Remember when he asked that? For what act are you trying to kill me for? Because, I healed this guy, I saved that guy, I did this guy, gave him his sight back, gave him his hearing back, fed all these people, healed him of leprosy. Which one of these acts have I broken the law, or are you going to crucify me for? That's what he says. When the rotten people see the good people, they'll have no defense to argue with them. And Jesus even experienced the same thing when he stood before the Pharisees. Which act of wonderfulness am I deserving of death for? Just like the people say, I don't go to church because y'all are hypocrites. Why would you call us that? And if we're doing our jobs, they can't call us that. And that's what Peter's saying right here. He was one who was probably the worst example of Christianity, who eventually became pretty good and eventually made the decision to be killed for Christ. By the way, he was crucified upside down. So if you ever see the sign for Peter, it's this. That's not disrespectful of Jesus. They went to crucify him and he says, I'm not worthy to be crucified like Jesus was. And he asked them to do it upside down. So his head was down here and his feet were up in the air. And they did. They killed him like that. So if you ever see an upside down cross, that means Peter. Just, I don't know if you knew that or not. A lot of symbols and embolism in religion, so that's what it means, Peter. All right, so that's chapter 3. Kind of like the old, the proof is in the pudding. I'll believe it when I see it. All the little cliches we have. If you mean it, do it. We've all said that at one time or another in our lives concerning something. Yeah, if you're that good a kid, then let me see you be that good a kid. You're that great a lawnmower, let me see how great you can make my lawn look. Right? We've all said that. Well, if you can do it, you can turn that lawn into this cupcake, then chances are the person that hired you is going to say, wow, you got the job, kid. You're going to bring glory to yourself and to the Lord. If you acknowledge the Lord, by the perfect job you did here. True Christians, this is their motto right there. True Christians, they look for an opportunity to serve. That's chapter 3. Go away. I'm looking for